Hello and welcome. I'm Lori Schneider with Pollinator Friendly Alliance. You can find us at pollinatorfriendly.org. Today's presentation is called How to Change the New World: Biodiversity, Climate Change, and Human Health. An important and relevant topic in today's world for sure. Today's speakers are myself, Lori Schneider. I'll be giving an overview on the topic and introducing Angela Laws, endangered species conservation biologist with Xerces Society, and Ann Mosey, attorney, DFL Environmental Caucus executive board member and candidate for Minnesota House of Reps. They both will be talking a little bit more in detail on biodiversity, climate change, and what we can do to help.
So today we'll talk about just a few considerations of the connections between climate change, biodiversity, and human health. This is a complicated issue. It's international. It's enormous and not an easy one. But that's why we're here today, right? So we can learn and join together in a collective voice and take action to make change for good. A relevant and timely discussion considering these strange times we're in. COVID-19 and its shelter-in-place orders have brought a welcome relief from pollution, but do the longer trains of climate change, habitat destruction, and the lack of biodiversity play a role in virus and disease spread? That is what we will talk about today. Environmentalists and scientists have been sounding the alarm for decades that climate change and the lack of biodiversity would also destroy our natural safeguards and bring on disease and viruses. COVID is an unhappy reminder that human health is linked directly to the planet's health. There are obvious interconnections between climate change and biodiversity. It's widely known that biodiversity and maintaining environmental integrity is key to mitigating climate change and rising temperatures. The loss of biodiversity contributes to climate change. For example, when we destroy forests, we emit carbon dioxide, the major human-produced greenhouse gas. When a forest is disturbed, it upsets the balance of nature and the balance between pathogens and people, and increases the risk of animal-borne infectious disease. These diseases that jump from animals and humans, which normally would not encounter one another if not for biodiversity loss, land development, and deforestation, is called zoonosis. For instance, a study out of Stanford University found that forest fragmentation near a national park in Uganda created more pathways for human-animal interaction and Ebola. We are removing those natural barriers. For instance, they found that changes to the landscape drove primates to come closer to humans to look for food. At the same time, impoverished people looked to those same places for resources to support their families. Likewise, climate change has been identified as a primary driver of biodiversity loss, already altering every part of nature. 1 million species are currently threatened with extinction, and we are undermining the entire natural infrastructure on which our world depends. It's hard for me to say that. I want to cry when I say that, but I got it out. Other things on wildlife include poaching, trafficking. We lost the last male rhino, and poachers target rare creatures like these. Some species decline as a result of climate change, making them rarer, and more desirable by those who trade them. Dr. Cavaccioli's research shows how most microorganisms that support all higher trophic life forms are also affected by climate change. Biodiversity of these organisms is rapidly declining because of human activity as well. Viral, bacterial, and fungal pathogens of plants and animals adapt to temperature, pesticides, and interactions between these microorganisms in ways that affect ecosystem function. And some of these organisms keep viruses in check, but they may not be able to adapt to higher temperatures, for instance, because of climate change. Mismatches or asynchrony of pollinators and their plants can cause extinction of those specialized and less adaptable pollinators like wild bees. For instance, the University of Colorado found that glacier lilies are blooming earlier than they did a decade ago. The lilies bloom before the bumblebee queens emerge in the spring, so the flowers are not getting properly pollinated, and the hungry bees are finding their flower foods in short supply. So these are just some of the key elements describing those connections between climate change, biodiversity, and human health. Now let's bring Angela into the conversation and bring it a little closer to home and talk about conserving biodiversity to mitigate climate change. You ready, Angela?
Yep.
Go ahead and share your screen. Angela Laws is an endangered species conservation biologist and the climate change lead with the Xerces Society. She received her PhD in biology from the University of Notre Dame and has over 20 years of experience studying grassland invertebrates. She's based in Sacramento and works with various partners to create climate-smart pollinator habitat in the Central Valley. Welcome, Angela.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about these issues. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, the Xerces Society is a nonprofit focused on protecting biodiversity by protecting invertebrates. And much of our work is focused on pollinators. So we got a nice overview about declining biodiversity. It's something that's been going on for a very long time. We have a good handle on declines in diversity of vertebrates, so mammals, fish, birds. And now there's growing awareness that insects are also declining in diversity and abundance. And this is something that a lot of us notice over the course of our lifetimes in the windshield effect, right? So I can remember as a kid riding in the car with my parents through the country, and the car windshield would be covered with dead bugs. And that just doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen. And so this is something that many of us have seen over the course of our lifetimes, and now scientists are starting to document the same phenomenon using long-term data sets. So this figure is from a paper that was published last year, and what they did was a review paper. They basically just cataloged every study they could find that showed a decline in insect abundance or richness, meaning the number of species, over time. And so the bars show where the research took place. A taller bar means more studies at that location. You can see most of this research takes place in Europe or the US, so there's some bias in where this research is taking place, or at least where it's being published. But the processes that are driving these insect declines in these locations are operating globally. The other thing to see is that these bars are made up of lots of different colors. So each color represents a different insect order. And because we see there's lots of different colors represented there, what that tells us is that this is widespread among insects. It's not just beetles that are declining or pollinators. It's all different kinds of insects are experiencing these declines. And now more and more studies are also starting to highlight climate change as one of the drivers of these declines, in addition to things like pesticides. So climate change is one of these drivers. There's broad consensus in the scientific community that this is happening, that it's caused by human activities, particularly the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation. This is a picture of Grinnell Glacier in Glacier National Park. This particular glacier has lost 45% of its mass in the last 50 years. And in fact, 26 of Glacier's original 37 glaciers are no longer large enough to technically be classified as glaciers. So this is something, again, that we can see over the course of our lifetimes. And so the main point here is that biodiversity and climate change are linked. The fight to protect biodiversity and the fight to address climate change are the same. We can't do one without the other. We have to address climate change to protect biodiversity. And we also need biodiversity to help us mitigate and adapt to climate change. So just to make sure we're on the same page here, when I talk about mitigation, I'm talking about actions that reduce the causes of climate change. So if we reduce carbon emissions, or if we reforest an area that's been deforested, that's mitigation. Adaptation are actions that address the consequences of climate change. So for example, if we build seawalls to protect against sea level rise, that's adaptation. And biodiversity helps us with both of these. So there's more and more research showing that climate change can accelerate biodiversity loss. So we're already losing biodiversity, climate change can make that happen faster. And what these studies are also finding is that the scale of biodiversity loss increases with the magnitude of climate change. So the worse climate change gets, the warmer it gets, the more species we're going to lose. And I don't have time to go into the nitty-gritty of any of these studies, but there was one this year on bumblebees showing that bumblebee declines are greater in areas where the temperature exceeds the thermal tolerance levels for those bumblebees. And another one looking at how climate change can lead to rapid loss of many species in the same area in an assemblage. But if we can limit warming to 2 degrees or less, we can slow the loss. So if we can reduce the magnitude of climate change, we can reduce the biodiversity loss. So just to clarify, when I talk about the 2 degrees warming, what am I talking about? Because 2 degrees seems like a really small number, right? But when we talk about that, we're talking about average global temperature. So the temperature everywhere around the Earth, from the Sahara Desert to Antarctica. The goal of the Paris Agreement is to keep warming to 2 degrees or less. And this is relative to pre-industrial temperatures. We've already recorded an increase of 1 degree. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recommends trying to a goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius as opposed to 2 degrees Celsius. However, we're on track to reach 3 or 4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, which would be catastrophic. And I'm not being dramatic when I say that. As a comparison, because it's hard, it seems like such a small number, right? But because it's global, it means huge changes in local temperature. And for comparison, the difference in average global temperature between an ice age and a warm period is 4 to 6 degrees Celsius. So we're looking at a similar magnitude of change, but going from a warm period to a hot period. And it's not desirable. It won't be good. So biodiversity can help us mitigate climate change and adapt to climate change. There are a lot of people now focusing on natural climate solutions. So it's this idea that if we focus on restoring and protecting healthy, diverse ecosystems, that can make a significant contribution to mitigating climate change, because healthy, diverse ecosystems sequester more carbon and can actually make a significant contribution. As an example of that, grassland soils are better at taking in carbon and storing it in areas where plant biodiversity is high compared to areas where plant biodiversity is low. But soil's ability to sequester carbon decreases at high temperatures. So if we put money and effort into increasing soil health and restoring grasslands now, we'll get more bang for our buck than if we wait to do that. An example of pollinators in agriculture, there are many studies showing that honeybees and wild bees together lead to better pollination services than honeybees alone, because wild bees can be active at different times or in different conditions than honeybees. And that's going to continue to be true under climate change when temperatures are going to be higher, we're going to have more extreme events. Having a diverse pollinator community means there's more likely to be at least one species that's going to be out pollinating during any type of conditions that we have. So why should we act now? There are many advantages to taking immediate action on climate change. It will enable us to hold warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to tackle this problem and the more it will cost. Anyone who's ignored like a problem with your car, which I have done, knows that the longer you wait, the more it costs to fix usually, because it leads to more problems. Acting now gives us more time to adapt to changes such as sea level rise. So if we can slow the rate of sea level rise, it gives us more time to make a plan and enact it, which means less financial costs, less human suffering. If we wait to act, we have fewer options for addressing climate change in the future. Like I talked about with soil carbon being less efficient at higher temperatures. If we act now, we have more choices. There are some effects of climate change that can't be reversed. So rapid loss of permafrost and rapid declines in crop productivity. Once that happens, there's no putting that back. And then again, if we act now, we can prevent rapid biodiversity loss. And just like acting now gives us more time to adapt to changes, it also gives species more time to adapt to these changing climatic conditions. So that also benefits, helps us protect biodiversity. So next I'm going to switch gears here and talk about how climate change can affect pollinators specifically. And then I'm going to talk about some things we can do in our own lives to help make pollinators more climate resilient. So climate change can have a variety of effects on pollinators and other insects. Insects are highly temperature dependent. The changes in temperature can affect all sorts of processes. It can affect their survival, their growth, how large they are at maturity, how many offspring they produce, how much time they spend foraging, when they start foraging. If it gets too hot and it reaches their thermal tolerance limit, they're going to experience a decrease in fitness. Rain shifts are commonly expected, so many species may shift their distributions to match more optimal climate. In general, that means species might move to higher latitudes or higher altitudes. For example, bumblebees have been seen to shrink their ranges in the south, in the southern parts of their range, but not really change in the north. So not all species will change in the same way or at all. Phenological changes are also expected, and Lori kind of talked about this with her example with the globe lilies in Colorado. So the timing of biological events is called phenology, and some species are timed to, like some bees emerge at the same time as their plants flower. If the plants and the bees are responding to different environmental cues, you get a mismatch so that the plants are flowering before the bees emerge, or vice versa. Just like insects, plants are also responding to climate change. The changes in plant quantity, quality, and diversity all are going to affect pollinators. So here in California, we're going to get a lot more drought, and that means lower plant quality. But there's also some data showing that even increases in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can have effects on the sugar content in nectar. So there are things like that. Changes in diversity are really important, especially for pollinators that are specialists and rely on a real narrow subset of plants. So if those particular plants increase or decrease in abundance, that's going to have a big impact on the pollinator community. species interactions can be affected. So predator-prey interactions, host-parasite interactions, all of those can be highly temperature dependent, especially in insects. And then, of course, all of these stressors can combine with each other, and the effects of climate change can affect with other drivers of biodiversity loss. So there are many things that are causing declines in insects. Pesticides and habitat loss are big ones, but also invasive species, pollution, land management, and climate change. And I have all of these arrows going in towards the butterfly, but they could also be interacting with each other because certainly these do interact. You can imagine a butterfly that encounters some pesticides. Maybe that pesticide exposure isn't lethal, but maybe during a drought or a heat wave, that pesticide exposure becomes lethal. So we need to think about the interactions among these stressors. And then cities have a special issue, which is the urban heat island effect. So cities are hot. They're a lot hotter than the surrounding areas due to the large amount of concrete and asphalt and other impervious surfaces. And they can be 20 degrees or more warmer than surrounding rural areas. This picture is Milwaukee, and you can see in the city center where it's red, temperatures are much higher than out more into the rural areas where the yellow and blue indicate lower temperatures. Most of the time this might not be a problem, but during a heat wave and as temperatures increase, the urban heat island effect can exacerbate those effects, and it has negative effects on human health, can also affect pollinators and other insects. So what can we do? There's actually a lot we can do to make our cities and towns more climate friendly for pollinators. And it's, you know, there is a lot. I feel like there is some hope here. We can create habitat and increase habitat connectivity. We can reduce additional stressors. We can reduce the urban heat island effect, and we can advocate for change. So Xerxes has several fact sheets on climate change that you can get off of our website. These are all geared towards California, but much of the information is really broadly applicable. So even if you're not in California, I think you'll find these useful. And we are working on some more general publications. Okay, so the first thing we can do is create habitat. Even a small garden can make a difference. Even if you don't have a yard, if you just have a patio to put out some plants, that can be valuable habitat. In general, the more habitat we have, the larger populations can be. And the larger population is generally less vulnerable to extinction than a small population. And they'll better be able to withstand bad years and extreme weather events associated with climate change. So that's why it's important to create habitat. We recommend you use a variety of nectar plants, at least 3 species flowering at all times during the active season. We advocate using native plants. They'll support a wider range of pollinators, especially specialist bees and butterflies that have really narrow resource requirements. And then you also want to include nest sites, and we have a brand new publication out on creating nesting and overwintering habitat for pollinators. It's really nice. It just came out like a few weeks ago, so you can check that out on our website. Increasing habitat connectivity is really important. So habitat patches or gardens in urban areas can act as stepping stones that increase connectivity. So if I have a garden and the house 2 houses down has a garden, and someone 1 street over has a garden, those are like stepping stones, and overall increased habitat connectivity as more and more people plant gardens. And then linear habitat like this hedgerow that's along an almond orchard acts as roadways that increase habitat connectivity. So you can think about places along roadsides or fields where you could create linear habitat like this, which is really important for increasing habitat connectivity. When you have increased connectivity, you can have larger populations and you have more gene flow, which means you have individuals moving among populations, breeding, increasing the amount of genetic variability, which is important because that means the population is more likely to have the genes that will help it to adapt to new conditions. We want safe habitat, so reduce pesticide use as much as possible. That's really important to reduce those additional stressors that are affecting pollinators. Try to avoid neonicotinoids, which are systemic pesticides, including plants that are pre-treated with neonics. They stay in the system for a long time and can be, once you spray it, like if it lands on the leaf, it gets taken up in the pollen and nectar. And as I said, pesticides and climate change can interact, so that's why we want to reduce these other stressors. You can reduce the urban heat island effects by trying to depave, which is removing asphalt or concrete where appropriate. So this bottom picture is in a parking lot where they removed the concrete median and planted plants. It has the benefit of reducing flood risk and reducing the amount of pollutants in our water. You can also plant native trees and plants. Planting trees in your neighborhoods can reduce temperature where appropriate. There's some parts of the country where trees might not be as appropriate, but it can reduce temperatures in your neighborhood that helps keep it cooler, especially during heat waves. And many moths and butterflies use native trees as host plants. And then green infrastructure can also help reduce the urban heat island effect. So it benefits people and pollinators. And then finally, we need to advocate for change. This is a mural painted by an artist in Venice showing how climate change and sea level rise would affect his city. To protect biodiversity, we really have to reduce the magnitude of climate change. So these are all things that we can do to help pollinators become more resilient, but ultimately we also have to keep the magnitude of warming to preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius or at least 2 degrees Celsius. We want to protect most biodiversity. It requires immediate action, but it is possible. One of the things that gives me hope is that it is so far-reaching. It's such a big problem, but what that means is that we can address this problem in a way that solves a lot of other issues, like environmental justice issues, food security issues, a lot of things like that. And it is something that requires bottom-up and top-down action. So we can take these actions. And now I'm excited to hear about some of the other things Anne's going to talk about policy-wise that our government can do. Okay, thank you. And just a shout out to any of our members out there. They make our work possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. If you have questions, we'll take a few questions for Angela now, and then we'll open up for questions again later. Can you type them in the chat? If you don't know where your chat is, it should be in the ribbon, the black ribbon at the bottom of your screen. Just click on chat and then type in your question for Angela. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, but in the meantime, give you a few minutes to send your questions over. And Angela, if you just want to keep an eye out for coming in. Our next speaker is Ann Mosey. She's an attorney who spent 21 years advocating for financial stability and freedom from harassment and abuse for her clients in family court. For Ann, walking alongside someone who needs help and into the light is the best we can all do, and everyone needs a little help now and again. So who would have thought that the 21st century underdog would be our planet and all the creatures on it, right? She's a current DFL Environmental Caucus Executive Board member. Ann sees the birds and the bees as the canary in the cave. Their demise is our demise. As a hobby farmer in May Township, Ann believes it is overdue time for leaders to advocate for environmentally sustainable changes for a healthy planet for future generations. So let's see, we've got a couple questions there, Angela. You want to take a few?
Yeah, so somebody asked if the slideshow would be available, and I said that I would coordinate with you. And another person asked how you dispose of removed concrete or asphalt, and I actually don't know the answer to that, but there's a whole group there's a whole website on depaving that give you all sorts of information, and I'm sure they can tell you what happens with the leftover concrete. That's a great question. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't answer it.
All right, well, you did a great job on your talk. They don't have too many questions, but we'll come back. And Anne is ready. I see her on deck. You want to share your screen?
How's that?
Looks great.
All right. So this is the view of the planet, the first photo taken at the Apollo mission. And this is a view of the horizon. This is the area that is affected when we talk about carbon in the atmosphere. It's a very small area. It's about 10 minutes if you drive your car, if you would imagine driving your car straight on the freeway. And what we're doing is we're spewing man-made warming pollution into that thin atmosphere as if it were an open sewer. And while that carbon sits in that area and the sun hits it, it causes those particles to warm significantly, and it's changing the planet. The things that are affecting this process are many. It's permafrost, coal mining, plants, oil production, air, land transit, industrial, and all of the crop burning and are all contributing factors. Over time, this has become a significant issue, and it is affecting the overall temperature of the global surface of the planet in a notable way. So much so that the last 19 of 20 years are the hottest on record, and the last 5 are the hottest, and it continues. Now this is a picture of Minnesota. This is CD6. I have, as an environmental board member on the DFL caucus, I have the opportunity of setting up a debate between our endorsed candidates at the state level. And so this entire area of CD6, I'm the only endorsed environmental candidate. There is not one single other candidate in the middle of Minnesota. This is a close-up of that green space. As an environmental caucus member, we created some initiatives that we circulated throughout the state through the caucusing process to get them on the ballot. That way we sort of bypass the political process and the voters get to decide. So this is one of the initiatives. There were 15, and I think 7 or 5 made it past the 60% mark to be on the ballot. So we have clean water, we have environmental rights. This is something that certain groups would like to erode so that we can do mining in Minnesota. Some mining is fine. Some mining has always been part of Minnesota's history, but there is a new mining that is not welcome from an environmental point of view because of the water-rich environment that we have here. This was a proposal to put on the ballot as well. It is not yet fully decided and has political opposition. What ended up happening is the courts weighed in on some of these chemicals and made decisions when politicians wouldn't. This was an initiative that I suggested. It didn't make it on the ballot. It would change environmental law in Minnesota or wherever it would be enacted, at whichever level it would be, national ones. So there are some countries that have modified their constitution with the rights of nature amendment. And what that would mean is that you don't start with looking at whether a corporation can do what they want to do without harming the environment. You start with looking at whether citizens want to have their local ecosystems disrupted, and it would shift the power and decision-making back to the people. This is an issue that came up because one of the climate deniers in our Minnesota State House, actually the guy I'm running against and others, are trying to push for the ability to legislate giving away Minnesota's lands to foreign corporations for the purposes of pipelines. All of those things are intended to address climate change. Climate change, one of the aspects of climate change is the increased heat. Some of it goes into the ocean. This is a map over time and depth so that you can get a sense of how the oceans are warming. Warming oceans have much more serious and frequent hurricane activity. And the reason is because with more evaporation, more precipitation, more water in the sea, and so it goes, this cycle is revved up with the extra heat. And one of the new phenomenons that we are seeing as a result of more water in the atmosphere, at least I'm noticing it in Minnesota this year, they're called rain bombs. We had a snow event that covered much of the country, and we recently had a water downpour that was from the north border of Minnesota to the southern border of Texas. It's not noticeable in the moment when you sit there and watch the rain coming down, but when it's covering the entire country for a day, that's different. This is lake near where I live. It's hard to say that things are going badly when it's absolutely still beautiful. And yet, this is my barn. It had never been this flooded ever before. And the flooding is not just, what you see in front of your face. There's flooding across the globe. And it's pretty significant. It does a lot of damage to a lot of places. I think last year, Iowa was underwater. And so as the heat evaporates the ocean, in other places, it doesn't necessarily get the rain. It tends to be, if you're going to get rain, you're going to get hot rain. And so areas that had once been fertile and tillable and could produce crops maybe don't anymore. This is a map of hotter temperatures and the corresponding relationship of those hotter temperatures to fires. We had fires in Canada and Australia, California. There is a correlation between these temperature events, storms, and floods. Angela talked a little bit about the melting. Here's a visual of what it looks like as the declining ice mass is happening before our eyes. This is Florida. Flash flooding or water thermal occurrence. These are the top cities at risk for sea level rise by 2070 in terms of assets exposed, the value of the property. And this is the same exposure, but by population. We've known that this was happening at a governmental level. It's documented. And as I was going through this presentation, I have a lot of crib notes where I can refer to articles. And I tried to pull up some of the US government documentation, and they have been pulled from the internet, which was disturbing. The heat is affecting food crops, both in quality and in quantity. Climate change is a medical emergency. This is a map of the drivers of disease according to the World Health Organization. The things that we are doing to affect the planet, changes in agriculture, commerce, war, famine, etc. This is a visual of the spread of disease through bugs, through mosquitoes, and COVID would maybe be an example of something that might be moving because of, well, not COVID. These are bug-related diseases, and they're moving because of temperature changes. This is a current, as of this month, map of COVID deaths across the Americas only. United States is really winning on that one. Zika was one of the diseases that was prevalent in the Americas. We are looking at a decline of 50% of our land-based species this century because of climate change. The cost of not addressing this far surpasses the cost of addressing it. Because if we can do some of the things we need to do, this annual cost and damage would be mitigated. And luckily there are things we're doing. We have increased our green energy significantly more than we had already had planned. We've got wind energy on the rise globally. It does not cause cancer, by the way. And solar energy is on the rise. The guy I'm running against opposed funding schools to put solar energy on, which I think is a crazy place to be in politics, but for funding for teachers and less for, you know, planet demise. This is a map of the increased installations, and it's because of the reduced cost to make the infrastructure. There are plenty of countries that have more solar power access than we do, and it's because they're not fighting a fossil fuel system. For example, the Chilean market has just really taken off. Obviously, we can do that too if we had the mindset. Now, solar energy is not something that's depleted, and there's plenty of it. Storage is another issue, but that's also improving. LED lights are helpful in reducing the need for energy. These are the auto manufacturers that have committed to moving to electrical vehicles. And then there's a question of political will. There's a initiative going on right now through August 3rd to determine what the Biden DFL, our candidate, presidential presumed endorsed candidate, what his platform will be. One of the elements of it is to rejoin this agreement. This was the People's Climate March. Remember when marches were peaceful? We have to get this thing addressed, and we have to do it quickly.
Great, thank you, Anne. I don't think I see another question there, but we will send you an email with follow-up information on these great questions. We are so grateful to our speakers today, Angela Laws from Xerxes and Ann Mosey, candidate for Minnesota House and DFL Environmental Caucus board member. And thank you all for coming and sharing this time with us, learning more about climate change, biodiversity, and human health.